And let me introduce the two distinguished guests who are going to lead the discussion this afternoon. Dr. Eric Walker, who's a current member of the University Promotion and Tenure Committee and a professor in the College of Arts and Sciences Department of English. He's also served on the Arts and Sciences Promotion Committee, is that correct? And there's another promotion.
Oh, there are a whole bunch of them.
There's a lot of experience.
We do committees.
Promotion and tenure. And then Sally McRorie, who's our provost, former vice president, who was in charge of faculty development and advancement, and prior to that, dean of the college. What's it called then? What's the College of Fine Arts? That's easy. Okay. And the correct College of Fine Arts. Okay, are we ready to go? Cool. We'll play the video and then they'll lead us in a discussion of the role of publishing and promotion in tenure.
Publishing and promotion and tenure. I had originally hoped that I would be there with you and participate in this session, but I was unexpectedly asked to give a talk in Singapore. So while you were all enjoying thinking about promotion and tenure and its relationship to publishing, I'm halfway around the world participating in a very different sort of workshop. There are a number of issues that we thought would be appropriate and interesting to consider and talk about during the session as we were planning it, and I just wanted to mention a couple of them. One has to do with the often radical diversity of different practices, expectations, types of production, peer review processes, publication timelines, et cetera, across disciplines. Publishing in academia is very much not a case of one size fits all, but a quite extensive smorgasbord of different sorts of practices that must be kept in mind when we're doing things like evaluating people for promotion and tenure. There are a whole bunch of different new, relatively new approaches to publishing, ranging from things like cross-disciplinary publishing. That's not necessarily new, but there's an often increased emphasis these days on interdisciplinarity, and that, because of the radically different practices across disciplines, might have some very important implications for how we evaluate and judge publications for people who do that kind of cross-disciplinary work. A thing that's related to that would be the question of how do we approach things like publication via social media. Is there or should there be any kind of mechanism for evaluating things like blog posts, if that is one of the primary outputs of a faculty member here at FSU? Similarly, things like the digital world, the online world. Do we consider online journals to be viable and impactful, important venues for publication? Do we do that across disciplines, or is it a very specific disciplinary thing? And how do we evaluate things like digital humanities projects that are not necessarily traditional modes of publication, but have to do with other sorts of productivity, other sorts of production? Related to that, we have a question of, do we or can we or should we consider the different kinds of creative works that people who work in historically scholarly rather than artistic domains, do we count different types of creative work equivalently to traditional journal or book publications? Should we or should we not? And then finally, the last question I'd like to raise here is, given the big push towards STEM, a STEM focus for the university here in Florida, STEM comes with its own particular set of practices, criteria, expectations. Will the push towards STEM have an impact on how publication and publication practices are viewed and evaluated in non-STEM disciplines? Will they maintain their own particular modes of going about this, or will they be colored by this push towards STEM? So there are many other issues that could be raised. I think you all are in for a very interesting session, and thank you all for being here.
Well, that should get us to 2:15, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are we gonna start this?
I'll go with one, and then you can
All
take
right.
another. I'll lead with Gary's questions and take them up somewhat in sequence. But please stop us as you've got questions. The first refers to the many different kinds of publications. Let me broaden publication actually out to research, because the process of evaluating a candidate for promotion and tenure from the local line, the unit line, the department, all the way up through a college dean's writing letters up to the university committee with the provost and the president, is a process of evaluating the research achievements of that faculty and also teaching, but let's for the moment restrict it to research. And that research can be demonstrated in quite a number of different ways. But from the perspective of the university committee and from the perspective of the president and the provost, the gold standard through all these different means, all these different forms of publication is peer review. And so a university committee, I sit on a university committee and I'm looking at research portfolios from people in engineering, I'm looking at research portfolios from people in the College of Medicine, from law, in education. Pure math, that was one that I just jump right in and I understand everything that's going on.
Me too.
Which is to say not. And so at the university level, those of us as a committee at FSU, there's a committee of 20 with a representative from every college, and we're around the table, and not a single one of us thinks that we have the equipment to, on our own, evaluate that research material, except that we're depending on a binder that is filled with peer-reviewed evaluations. The publications themselves, we hope, have been peer-reviewed, but we've got a department that has looked to make sure that they're peer-reviewed. We've got votes from a department that has looked at them to see if they're peer-reviewed. We've got a dean looking at them to make sure that they're peer-reviewed. And we rely very much on that process. In other words, if those of you who are graduate students or moving into the profession, what you need to first internalize and get straight are what are the criteria in your own particular discipline. And once you're straight on what the criteria are for top-ranked, peer-reviewed research in your discipline, then it's going to be validated all the way up. And you're not going to have a crazy English professor sitting there saying, I don't understand what that math is, to heck with them. So again,
This can't be important.
well, I'll give you an illustration of when I do around the table have to sometimes be ready to explain to my colleagues at the university what's going on. I have poets in my department, okay? I have people doing literary scholarship, I have people doing publishing monographs, but I've got creative writers in my department. And when a 500-page novel hits the table, people go, oh yeah, it's kind of a big book. But my poets are, 90-page volume of poetry, and that hits the table at promotion and tenure. And there'll be some eyebrows around the table saying, that's a book? And the English department says, yes, it is. This is a high-quality press. It has been subjected to rigorous peer review by editors, and we've signed off on it as, in our discipline, what is the gold standard for publication, and everybody around the table generally nods their heads and say, yeah, if it's good for you. So as long as it's got peer review there, I think we're good to go across many, many, many different forms around the university.
Yeah, and there is huge diversity across campus. In physics, for example, it's not unusual for a physics professor, assistant professor to come up and have hundreds of articles, most of them with dozens of co-authors. And that's just the nature of that discipline and what's appropriate as that discipline has emerged and taken its shape. It's quite different in poetry. It's quite different in social sciences, in education, all across the campus. Every unit has its own sets of expectations. What we're looking for as a university, however, are faculty members who increase their own, but also the university's reputation and quality on both a national and eventually an international stage. So the overall package that one puts together when one is nominated for promotion and or tenure has to tell that story. You have to tell that story very well. Every department has a set of bylaws. These are required by the university. They're required for our accreditation purposes. Every set of bylaws should explain the expectations for promotion and tenure at each level of rank for that department and the programs within that department. Your program, wherever you are, should have that. It should be available readily to you as a faculty member or a graduate student. It should be posted on the website. It should be available in print form if that's what you prefer. This is what you need to know for your particular discipline, especially at this institution, if you are indeed a faculty member here trying to gain promotion. That's important to know, and you should, if you have any questions about that and about what the specifics of that mean, then your department chair, a faculty mentor, other colleagues, someone from outside your department, someone from even a different college, Dr. Kistner, who is the, there she is, VP for Faculty Development and Advancement. Her office deals with this, with the nuts and bolts of this, and she and her colleagues know how this works. So you shouldn't feel like you don't understand what the expectations are. If there's a question, find out. If you go through all those channels and you still don't know, come and see me, okay? Because in the end, the president and I are the ones who make the final decisions on whether someone is promoted and or tenured. And it's that way everywhere. So you want to make sure that you're really, really clear. If you are an assistant professor at this institution, part of what happens is a second year review. And that review, unlike the annual reviews that you get from your department chairs, that second year review is done by your department P&T committee. So if you're in a big department with a lot of diversity, that's an incredibly important step for you, milestone for you, because that's when they say, yes, you're doing the right things to build the record that you need in publication or its equivalent research in your area. And by the fourth year review, which is also done by your P&T committee, if you haven't set things in motion to be ready in another year to be considered for possible nomination, then you're probably a little slow, and you may be thinking about what you need to do to be able to be successful. We recognize that it's more difficult for many, in many disciplines, to publish books. When the book is the thing, and you want it published and you want it reviewed prior to the time you go up, that's harder to do now. Everybody recognizes that, and it's also expensive. And the full possible range of all the ways that one can publish now in journals and blogs, and he mentioned, Gary's listed a whole bunch, and you all know more than I do about all the varieties of those. Digital humanities, digital scholarship is really quite different than things were even 10 years ago. So within your department and within your own promotion and tenure advice that you get within your department, it's really important for you to know what they recognize, what your peers recognize as valuable and appropriate dissemination of your research. Good?
Good.
Questions? Questions? Okay.
We can always drill down into the fine print on any of these, and I don't want to do too much of that, but I'll just add two quick things about, first, peer review is the gold standard. Well, there's peer review and there's peer review. And so there's going to be peer review of the peer review.
That's right.
We'll go meta on this in many different ways with lots of different committees. What do I mean by that? Whole range of journals, they're all peer reviewed. Well, some of the peer review processes may be more rigorous than other peer review processes, which means that you've published in peer-reviewed journals, but probably at some point outside people who are evaluating your materials are going to say, these are better journals than those journals, probably on the basis of the rigorousness of the peer review that's going on there. So again, those are the kinds of things you need to work out with your colleagues in your discipline, with your chair. If there are, in fact, ratings of journals. If I've seen bylaws, criteria in departments around the university where they quite clearly spell out that they're expecting X number of articles, let's say for argument, sake of argument, half a dozen, and at least 2 of them need to be in top tier journals defined by the department as X, Y, and Z. And so again, those distinctions have been made on the basis of peer review. Second quick thing, and that is, peer review means that something has been accepted for publication. And so one of the other items in this process that you need to get clear is, when is something accepted and published? And that is, in my department, for example, I've got colleagues who, when they present their materials for annual evaluation, say, well, I got a book under contract. And I go, great, that's a lovely thing for you to have a book under contract, but it has not been approved by the editorial board. There's still outside reviewers to go out there. Until it is in press, we are not going to be counting it as a publication. But because there are things like, for assistant professors, the tenure clock, when you have to go up, we very often in my department have people going up for promotion and tenure to associate professor who have materials that are in press. The book is not out yet, simply because it takes you a while. And then we get into arguments in my department about, for the people going up from associate to full, whether or not they, well, you don't want to know. But again, be sure you're clear about what constitutes published in your discipline, and whether or not there's some lines that are being drawn about, we actually need to see the artifact, whether in digital form or whether in print form, and also the different standards of the rigorousness of peer review.
Correct.
Gary talked about interdisciplinarity. You want to?
Oh my, yes.
I'm sorry, there's a question over here.
I just had a question based on what you just said, and I work here in the libraries, and of course you all know that one of our big issues has to do, we're being squeezed on the e-journals. And when you just said the list of approved journals, my guess, and it may not be right, and others may know better, are those are the ones that are squeezing us, you know, that they're raising their prices, right, so that we're getting to the point where we can't subscribe to all of them any longer. So, and a lot of times people say that the promotion and tenure process it has to change to make this whole, the business model has to change, because we can't continue to buy all the things that everybody needs, right? So have you thought about that, and how that might have an impact on how maybe the process could change a bit to throw some weight away from the journals that are I say squeezing. I mean, it's the research and the work of the people in this room and throughout the campus that is going, they're doing it so they can get promotion and tenure, and then we buy it back.
Right.
And that's really unsustainable right now, and I believe, I mean, the whole paywall, putting it behind a paywall, it's unsustainable. It can't continue the way it is. And so I'm just curious, because that's a big talk in the open access world. There's a lot of talk about how do we value the process, how do we merge this together, basically, with promotion and tenure.
Go ahead.
There is a significant and continually rising cost for these packaged journals, sets of journals. And it's true that academics, like everybody in the room, do the work and get it published, and then these folks package it and sell it to us at a really high cost. We have a lot of opportunity to present work that you all do as part of Florida State in digital right? Digital, you know about that? Okay. Which is helpful for you and your colleagues here, and for other people who access that cache of publications. And this is clearly a big topic in higher education. It's not just affecting this institution, but every institution in the country. And I think we're going to come to a turning point or a tipping point soon, where there's going to have to be some change in that model. We're not there yet, so I think you're still caught in the cusp here of that coming change, and that you still really need to focus on doing the kinds of things that have, say in the last decade, counted within your discipline, counted within and among your peers for what's important for you to do. And the kinds of journals that you choose to publish in. Eric's right, the more prestigious and the wider the circulation of the journal, the more likely it's going to help you in your career. That's just the way it is. Whether or not universities are able to pay for that is a different story, right? But that's what you have to focus on, and that is, right now, regardless of the issues, that is how one establishes an academic reputation, and that's what we want you to do. Micah.
Yeah, hi. Question kind of following off of that, but also relating back to peer review. So for the past couple of years, organizations like the MLA, Modern Language Association, American Historical Association, and then just last month, the College Art Association, have all issued these guidelines for the evaluation of digital work. So my question is, how and when do those kind of guidelines from those kind of organizations filter in to change the model for how we are considering things peer reviewed? I just don't know where those things go out, and then there's a press release, but is it actually changing how we're looking at work in the English department, taking the MLA's guidelines for evaluating digital work, and then filtering up to the level that you decide at, Dr. McRorie?
The university committee, in fact, meets, is it today or tomorrow?
3 o'clock today.
Today. Soon, very soon.
It's P&T 24/7 today.
That's right. And one of the conversations that always takes place in the spring meeting of that group is, what kinds of modifications do we want to make in the process? And I would suggest that Dr. Kistner bring this topic to the group today to talk about. These are the people who understand. These are 20, 24?
21, 22, low 20s, right?
Yeah, anyway.
About 2 dozen of us.
A lot of well-experienced faculty members who have dedicated themselves many times, frequently more than 1 year, several years or more, including this past review of everybody who was nominated for promotion and or tenure last fall. So this is a group that's well attuned to these issues, and I think it's an appropriate point for discussion today.
Again, back to the many different forms of scholarly production, artistic, this research and creative activity at FSU, because
Right.
For years and years and years, it's not just been digital humanities and things of that sort that have been kind of pushing the envelope. That committee has to sit there and evaluate from the dance program videos of dance productions. I'm sitting there trying to read up on choreography. And if I've got peer review saying, yes, in the field of its kind, this is excellent, this is A+, we go great. We had a wonderful time at the meeting back in December when Marcus Roberts, the jazz pianist, binder, so to speak, but it's all digital now, was coming forward from the College of Music. And so we just simply paused in the middle of the meeting because we had all the MP3 files of Marcus's jazz, and we said, could we just simply listen to Marcus play for a while? But again, we wouldn't.
That was peer review, right?
It was peer reviewed. In other words, I think I've got a little bit more expertise listening to that than the math. But the binder had endorsements and letters from outside academics and performers from around the country who should know, and they are looking at that material, and they've got letters in there signing it off saying that of its kind, this is excellent and superior work and the kind of thing that you want to give promotion and tenure to. So I think, Micah, to your question, yes, we're always looking at new ways of evaluating material that's not just journal publications or book publication.
And
We're gonna do that.
there are lots of other kinds of publications that can be submitted as part of your overall record, like journal proceedings and those kinds of things. They don't generally carry as much weight, and I don't think they should, but those are part of a total academic package that a faculty member assembles.
We were going to do interdisciplinarity.
Oh, yeah.
Let me say something, it may be a sidebar to interdisciplinarity, but that is collaborative work. I tend to work in a field, English, that still privileges the solitary romantic, so you go up for better or worse by yourself, although there is more collaborative work occurring in my discipline over the past quarter century than previously. So it is an eye-opening experience for me coming from that discipline when I'm on the university committee and I see the high-energy physics people in which the list of authors is about 100 or more. And in fact, one of the colleagues here on the physics faculty said, "Yeah, my name's on there and I hadn't even read it yet." So we're sort of buried there. So I've learned, because I'm not in social science, I'm not in sciences, about the priority systems of first author, and whether or not you need to have at least some of your materials in there if you are part of a big research team. Be first author, but again, it's going to be the discipline. It's going to be high energy physics. It's going to be engineering. It's going to be setting those kinds of standards. And I assure you that the university committee honors the standards that are set by the individual unit, unless it's clear that they've gone rogue on us. But that generally does not happen. But I think, again, if you're in a discipline in which the work is almost always by definition collaborative, you need to make sure, again, working with your chair or your mentor or both, that you've got a good idea about how your collaborative work is going to be evaluated when it comes to these decisions.
And some of our newer hires have been hired specifically in interdisciplinary initiatives. And for those faculty members who, were highly sought, and we're very pleased that they're part of our faculty now, that notion is increasingly important, because their work may really cross not only colleagues within their department or college, but also multiple colleges. And in that case, it's very important to understand clearly what the expectations are in every area in which you're interacting. I think we agreed last time that it was possible to get a dean from another college if part of your assignment and part of your work is collaborating with the College of Medicine, for example, to have someone there right in support of the work that you've accomplished. And that's important. Interdisciplinarity is the way of the future. We are an institution, like most universities, that has grown up with lots of silos. And those are very difficult to break down because of money in general, and also because of tradition and disciplinary differences. But we are focused as an institution, and I'm committed to really trying to change that as much as we can. I think that's the way the world is working now. So it's important for you, however, to make sure that you are clear on how that work is important, and make sure that you have work that's reviewed by all the appropriate people coming forward.
A quick question would be, that you just made me think about, is if the work that you're doing, some of the work you're doing is visible in the community because it's in place as a physical project, like the homeless shelter, or an interior design project, which I would do, I would still need to have peer review of that by getting people in my profession to come look at that work and then write something that says, this is good work, because it's real, when it's a physical project.
I understand.
Eric,
The
how do you?
one of the things that all the binders require is external letters.
Yeah.
And those letters are the opportunity, in addition to your chair and your dean, or deans, if it's interdisciplinary in the way we were just discussing, to really look at that quality. And that might be, they wouldn't necessarily have to come here, but, you know, you document it, you know, you musicians document it, as he just described
Okay.
from Marcus Roberts. You document it with video and or, you know, photographs. And we have that issue with dance and with music being temporal art forms.
That's
They have
exactly
to
what
be
it is.
documented. And so in the case of a building, it's actually easier because it sits there.
Go look at it.
Go
So,
look at it.
so if you have pictures of it, and, you know, obviously you did the work and all that, what you're saying is that the peer review documentation does not necessarily have to be getting people to go there and look at it. It could be from the external letters which say this is a worthy project.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Would you agree?
Yes, very much so. And one other footnote, again, they're in this footnotes about peer review, and that is the larger category of research under which publication is lodged. And that is, I'm in a discipline that doesn't have an enormous amount of grant activity, although we try all the time to get more grants. But it's not at stake in the way that grant activity is at stake in, Gary put up as a question, STEM disciplines. And so in many of those cases, there are about 70 cases a year that are on the table for the University Promotion and Tenure Committee. That's both going from assistant to associate and associate to full. But in many of those cases, there are people whose careers are depending upon not only publishing, but getting grants. But remember that the grant review process is itself a peer review process. And some of the big-time grants that will make your career have astonishingly rigorous peer review processes for those grants. And so when we see in those binders that someone landed this NSF grant, we know that that signifies in major ways how their research profile is spectacular, and it's going to be spending off publications. They're almost always there. But there are places where you need to be thinking about, if you happen to be in one of those disciplines where the expectation is that you are going to be getting grants, you need to be aware that simply publishing without having that grant component, if it is indeed part of the package and the criteria set by your discipline, then you may not have made the bar that you need to make. Do you make a bar? Hit the bar. Gary mentioned social media, and he also mentioned digital journals and things of that sort. But let me start with social media very, very quickly, because I do have a lot of people in my department that are blogging and tweeting and spending a lot of time doing that. How does that play out? It's not peer reviewed. It's not a publication. It's great. I'm glad you got a lot of followers. It's, you know, it's sorry. Maybe it's increasing your chances of publication out there because you're making. Let me try to draw an analogy between. There are a lot of disciplines, social sciences and sciences do a better job, a very scientific job, of citation counts. And one of the things that I've had to learn, because it's not really tracked in my discipline, humanities disciplines really haven't quite figured out, because we're messy, about how to in some way measure citation counts of what goes on in books and books of poetry and things of that sort. It just doesn't work in the same way that it works in the social sciences and in the sciences. But the scientists pay an enormous amount of attention to very finely calibrated measures of citation counts that are there. And you need, again, if you're in that discipline, to figure out exactly what the standards are in that discipline. Well, you're tweeting and you come running into my office and saying, look how many times I was retweeted today. That's not a citation count. I'm sorry. If your blog, you may have said something that is just outrageously stupid, and it's out there in big circulation. So again, I'm happy for my colleagues to be very, very active in social media. If there are forms of it that are demonstrably peer reviewed, then let's talk. But in terms of the documentation of your scholarly record, doesn't count over in my discipline.
I think that's the case in maybe every discipline today. I don't know of any that would be different right now. Right. And think about all the other kinds of publications that, as a faculty member, you might do. Book reviews, newspaper articles, those kinds of things. Those don't carry very much weight. Book reviews in certain disciplines may, depending on the nature of the book review itself. However, well, I don't need to go on. You understand. Questions?
But there are, again, online journals that are of two types, and
Yeah, that's
we're
right.
tracking those. Digital journals, if they're peer-reviewed, and if they can explain the peer review process in clear terms, that we're sending these out to readers, here's the editorial board. They're working just like a print journal, and that's fine. There is no distinction. We'll give full credit for the journals. Big journal in my field, well, it's not a big journal, I'd say it's a second-tier journal, just told us they're not printing anymore. They're going totally digital, but it's still a peer-reviewed process, and so an article published in that digital platform now, and that's the only way that you'll be able to publish in that journal, will count just as much as it did when it was a print platform. There are other digital publications, however, that are clearly not peer-reviewed. And in that case, it's not going to count for you very much. Gold standard is peer review.
Absolutely right. And submitted doesn't count much either.
In circulation.
In circulation.
Right.
Yeah. It needs to be in press and preferably published.
One of the things the committee does look for in terms of publications, this is, I used to teach the sort of intro to grad studies, intro to the profession, and I said it was always perverse of me to be working with a group of graduate students whose primary anxiety, front burner anxiety, was getting a job, and then we would start talking about promotion and tenure. I say, well, you've got your primary anxiety, which is getting a job, but I'm going to heap promotion and tenure on top of you for that. And then once you figured out how to get promoted in tenure, I'm going to heap the anxiety of getting promoted to full. And then we can have a conversation about your anxieties about who gets the chair professorship and who doesn't get the chair. I mean, it never ends. Okay. But there is an important way to cut the facetiousness, and that is when we're around the table and we're looking at publications, that's what you've done. Okay, that is a record of what you've done up to this point, and there is a component of the review which is what you got next. In other words, the committees are looking at your record of productivity as predictive of continued and future productivity. So it's a very smart thing for you to be doing, and I counsel my junior faculty members in my department all of the time as they're working with me on getting that big book out. And I say, well, while you're getting that big book out, it's going to be very important for you probably to have mapped out your next project. And as you map out your next project, it would be a good idea probably to show it, don't just have you have to write up a statement about your research in your binder. And everybody can do this sort of blue sky, over the next 20 years, I'm going to be writing 14 books and things of that sort. Well, you need some evidence of that. And one of the ways in which you can produce evidence towards that next project would be, for example, to give a couple of conference papers in refereed conference proceedings. By themselves, those things are not going to count for very much. In fact, they don't count as a publication, but if it's a really good conference and it's clear that you have gone out and done a couple of papers reporting some of the preliminary work that you're doing on that next project, that's demonstrable evidence in your binder that you are not going to just stall out after the book or the big grant that you've got, and that when you're an associate professor, you've got some really interesting new things that are going to be coming down the pipe. So it is good to be thinking about how you are, Sally said, the good phrase is, how are you going to tell your story? And the story that you want to tell is not only that I wrote a wonderful dissertation and I finally got it published and I'm ready to put my feet up now. No. I had a wonderful dissertation. I have turned it into a great book, and that has alerted me to all of these next things that I need to be doing in my next stage.
To build on what Eric was just saying about conferences, that those are very important, especially national and particularly international conferences. you get an opportunity to present a paper there, regardless of the kind of field you're in. There are a variety of different kinds of papers and conference proceedings. And while the proceedings themselves, if they're not published in another form, don't count a lot, the overall benefit that you get from establishing yourself, as he just described, and also establishing yourself as a person who is a member of that international community will help you in so many ways. As a junior faculty, I was at Purdue University. My third year, I went to 9 international conferences. Believe me, they didn't pay for all of those. But I saw that as an investment in my career, and I can't tell you how important an investment that was. I met people all over the world in my field. I learned how to network with those people, and I still am benefiting from that all these many years later. So think about that as well. That's an important thing. You also want to have people who will write for you. Your external reviewers need to be people, not necessarily who know you personally or have worked with you personally, that could be a problem, but who maybe know your work and who are full professors, at very fine institutions. Those are the reviewers who carry weight, and again, it comes right back down to peer review. So establish yourself as a peer. That's what I'm saying.
Nancy?
So, what do you think is the likelihood of some of the humanities disciplines rethinking this reliance on the book? And the reason I say that is that, at least in STEM fields, it used to be that dissertations were more a single monograph, and over time they evolved into the chapters, and those chapters being individual publications, and they're published in journals as these individual publications. But from my understanding becomes STEM. But my understanding of a lot of the humanities is this singular reliance still on the book. And a workshop that I went to recently was sort of on this topic, and I was going to reference it in some of my remarks later. But is this, with a lot of the university presses, hearing from those editors, the number of books that ultimately are published today is going down and down, and so the transition from dissertation to book in these high prestige presses or commercial presses is going down. They're basically the gatekeepers of promotion and tenure. And can this go on? Are there other ways to show the research productivity and excellence of faculty in these humanities disciplines other than the book?
Go ahead.
As someone who works in the field, we chew on that question year by year by year for the past 25 years. The crisis of the monograph, the pressure on. I'll say 2 things. One is that I think the redefinition of the standard of the monograph in the humanities, it's not across the board, by the way. In philosophy, it doesn't hold, but it does hold in most of the other disciplines, may very well occur with the redefinition of the dissertation project. And you will find organizations like the Modern Language Association, the American Historical Association saying, because of the pressure on book publishing and the monograph publishing, why don't we go back and rethink what constitutes the dissertation, which is still that little monograph waiting to be published. Can we do collections of essays and things of that sort? So that's something we're thinking about all the time. I will say for the second thing that even though the pressure is on, my faculty members are still able to publish. And so it hasn't crashed and burned totally yet. And we still believe in the value of that book project at year 4, year 5, year 6 as demonstrating the kind of intellectual skills and also the voice that you want to present to the nation and the world as the gold standard. My students always know that when I promise them I'm only going to say 2 things, it usually turns into 4 or 5. So I'll just add a third for you guys, and that is the UF press editor was here. I think she may be taking a break. Florida State, the issue now is a book, the monograph culture. So if you're not in that culture, I will be quick with this. Florida State University does not have an academic press. They did when I came here about 52 years ago, but it was folded into the University Presses of Florida, so it's now just an imprint of the operation that occurs down in Hogtown. And so we FSU as an institution is benefiting from academic presses around the country, University Press of Florida, University of North Carolina Press, University of Missouri Press, pressure on them all over the place, but we're not contributing, we're not paying any money into that, except for this. The humanities area chairs about 10 years ago sent a proposal forward to the Dean of Arts and Sciences and the Vice President for Research for us to create a subvention fund for monograph publication. And that is, here comes peer review as the gold standard again, and that is, if a faculty member in my department gets a book accepted, I got 2 books coming out from the University of North Carolina Press. I don't have them coming out, my faculty. Junior faculty in my department are going to be publishing 2 books with the University of North Carolina Press over the next couple of years, and they've been accepted, they're in press, peer reviewed and everything. At that point, we get a letter from the director of the press saying, are there subvention funds? Very often these are big endowment funds at places like Harvard and Stanford. But here, we just got some money from the dean and from the vice president. Could you kick us a check for $1,500 or $2,000 to help contribute some to the cost of publications? Because those editors have run the numbers, and whereas 40 years ago, with a print run of about 1,000, with the library orders, they were able to break even on the publication of a monograph, and they're not breaking even anymore, and that's one of the reasons that they're going to ebook publication. But if we can supply a subvention, once it's been peer reviewed, that helps. And so I think to the extent that we can make appeals to people like the provost, the dean, the vice president for research, at institutions that do not have a university press, to nevertheless continue to support financially the larger system nationwide, then we can keep that culture going.
Yeah. And in fields like art history, for example, where illustration is very important, those books are extremely expensive to produce.
Yeah, the first thing to go from our monographs are the illustrations. They got, nope. And I have just all these wonderful illustrations, because now we're all Googling and we're getting all kinds of illustrations very, very quickly, whereas before you had to go to a library and actually find them. But
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. It's good to drop in over here every night. You people are bringing me my books all the time. I mean, I can just Google all the images. Thank you for the service. Gary's questions. He wanted to know about creative work. We just kind of talked about that some. STEM. Is STEM changing the landscape of publication?
I don't know that it is. I wouldn't say that I've seen. Maybe someone in the audience has some ideas. You in the front row. You No? Huh?
Could we argue that they're maybe affecting the model of how we work, right? So we were talking about interdisciplinarity and collaboration earlier.
That's true.
That carries over from STEM. I think that obviously in 100 authors on one publication, and now we're trying to figure out how do we do that in the humanities, or does that replicate? And I think it does in sorts of digital projects and things that we work on with faculty down here in the library. So maybe that's an angle we could take from STEM.
Yeah, many of the disciplines, particularly at an institution like Florida State, are in fact collaborative by nature. Dance is extraordinarily collaborative. Theater, film. So it's not just STEM disciplines, but perhaps they've done a better job of documenting that kind of collaboration over the years in the development of those disciplines. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe the emphasis on funded research.
Mm-hmm.
I think STEM is definitely, that's bleeding into
That's a
the
good point.
social sciences and even the humanities.
That's a good point.
That maybe if it's not funded, maybe it's not research.
Right,
we
or it's
kind of-
not excellent research.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's problematic.
Yeah, that's true.
Because so often, from a social science perspective, we're dealing with small populations, small samples. We're trying to get at niche issues,
Mhm.
and you just can't find someone to fund something so boutique. right.
Mm-hmm. And there just aren't funding opportunities in many disciplines.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what
That's a good point.
And what constitutes a large.
Yeah, what's
right,
large,
that's
yeah.
very subjective, so. yeah.
That's very true. Right. Good point. Did you have other questions? Was that the end?
I tried to make notes. Those were the things that I got.
Okay. What questions do you all have? Yes.
What's the role of teaching in promotion and tenure? I know it's secondary to research, but
Typically it is. I mean, you have,
is it important?
it's important, sure it is. It's very important. That's not the focus of this conversation today, but yes,
Right.
clearly it's important.
Okay.
And in fact, in disciplines at the university will be the subject of research and publication. I mean, in other words,
Well, that's
you're-
true.
right. My wife is in science education, so she just slapped me sort of on the back of the head and said, you know.
And don't forget that.
And don't forget that, right? But it is clear, however, at this university that job one is research and publication. That the committee pays attention to publication, but I'll give you an example. The outside letters in the binder speak to the candidate's research, okay?
Period.
Period. They do not speak to the teaching record, which is here internal, and they don't speak, and we haven't talked about service. And to the extent that you were talking about sort of community-based projects, one of the conversations that will boil up in a number of disciplines is what can sometimes be a tricky border between service and research, whereby people are doing particular projects that may in fact lead to a kind of publication. And I've had these materials on my desk over the past 20 years, whereby the candidate comes to me and says, this is my research activity, and I go, it looks to me kind of like service, and we get into a conversation about that. So.
And that is a growing issue. It truly is. And I guess when we're thinking about research and evidence of research, the question really is about dissemination. So if you are a person who's actively involved in social entrepreneurship, for example, and that the outcomes of that work are part of your research, how is that documented? How are you going to let others understand why that's research and why it's important research?
Yes.
I guess I'm curious. We talked earlier about the inflationary pressures that we're feeling on subscription budgets, et cetera, and so this tension that we have because the system, the gold standard, is so deeply entrenched in it. And so you talked about maybe changes will be on the horizon. I'm just kind of curious about, I guess, a two-part question, which is part A, what could you predict or imagine being, I guess, that inflection point where something has to change? Like, what is that thing that's going to change? And then I guess the other part is there anything we could do to preempt that? Like, how can we prepare for that? And if we do prepare for it, like, what are the changes that we can slowly start introducing now? Just if you had some thoughts.
Take it away, Eric.
All right. When the revolution comes, I'm all for the revolution. I'm all for trying to change these models simply because the economic models don't seem to be playing out, as long as you keep peer review. I mean, I'll keep beating that drum. If you can show me that you've got a different model out here. And peer review is, again, think of the other labor component here. And the other labor component is that I'm being solicited to perform peer review all of the time. I got review articles for journals. I got to review things or books, and then when I have to report to my supervisors at the end of the year about what things I've been doing with my time, I'll have to list that. And it's a form of professional activity, but it's not publications. And I got to do something over here. And so there are these. It is who's paying for that, and how are we going to prevent other entities from profiteering off of all of that labor. And I think we're seeing that happen. We're seeing that emerge. And again, I'm all for the revolution. But just if you can figure out a way to keep peer review in there, go for it.
Yes.
It seems to me that the key is not necessarily the emphasis on peer review within P&T, it's on impact factor. Because it's the journals that are charging you a great deal of money, that have these very high impact factors, who are then dominating P&T. And so,
For some discipline.
right, for some, so I'm wondering, you know.
My colleagues produce high-quality stuff that everybody ignores though, so.
Right, so for you that, but I mean, I know in some of the social sciences and sciences, impact factor is very
Very
dominant.
Yeah, it's very important.
And
Absolutely
so,
right.
that I think is maybe where there might be some room for P&T to influence some of these journal issues. In other words, is there another way to judge the quality of a journal other than its impact factor? So that it
Of
would.
the journal itself.
Right, so that
Yeah.
it would count equally in the P&T evaluation. You know, you said often bylaws say you have to have 2 or 3 publications in these journals, and often those journals, why they're there is because of their impact factor,
Right.
right? So
Yes.
that to me seems to be where the intersection might be here.
Mhm. Good point.
So I don't know if there's any thoughts about that in your discussions, or the importance of it in your discussions.
Well, I mean, it's something certainly for the university committee and for committees on down the line,
Yeah, maybe
to
to
take,
think about.
And
to
what
think
kind
about.
of- I'm sorry, but what kind of, can we change the impact factor? I mean, is that really, is it circulation that's the impact, or is it, there's something, by putting them as the ones you know, it's a cycle, right? By putting them as the ones that you have to publish in, then yes, then that's going to keep going and keep going, and it's
And
going to
then
have to change at some
Maybe
point.
that could be replaced by something like citation count, right? So that the citation count is really indicative of how pervasive the research is, and, you know, now, people might be citing it and saying this is a bunch of hooey, right? You don't know.
But it's still cited.
Right, so that could be cut either way either, but you know, that may be where we could get some movement on this. you know.
Yeah, that's another good point, I agree. And what I always used to, and still do, tell our new faculty at orientation, some of you may have heard me say this, is years ago when I was a brand new assistant professor, my dean said, Sally, we know you're going to be an excellent teacher, and if you're not, we'll find a way to help you become one. But by the time you go up for promotion and tenure, you need to have at least a national reputation in your field, and preferably an international one. If I go in 4 years, if I go to a cocktail party in London, and I meet somebody in your field, they should know your work. And that was like, okay. It gave me a real sense of understanding, okay, this is what I need to do. And he said, that's the game we play here. And if you don't want to play that game, I'll help you find a position at another institution that has a different game. Right? Well, that's the game we play here too. And that's what you need to do.
And going to those 9 conferences was a big part of playing.
That helped a lot. It did help a lot. I can't tell you what an important choice that was for me.
And it's expensive, it is time consuming, they didn't pay for all those 9 conferences, and my travel budget has been steady for the past 15 years, it seems like, in the
Yeah.
department. And airline prices have not stayed steady, and hotel prices have not stayed. So, you know, I have a long line of faculty members out my door every year going, which of these do I need to do? What's going to be the best?
The most important.
What's going to be the most bang for the buck out of the limited amount of money that we've got? And then we go, thank you, the provost has got a travel fund, and
Yeah,
you can
because
apply
she
for
did
some
it.
travel fund out of the provost, and I can get you a trip out of the department. And now my college is funding trips, and it takes a lot of work to plan all of that stuff, and to try to, but that's what you got to do.
You really did. You really did have to do it. We have 5 minutes left. Another question, anyone? Yes.
Have there been any discussions on trying to find a way to measure the public impact of certain research projects? And so if an article gets picked up by the New York Times, say, and it gets, you know, massive circulation, does that count more than just a regular publication in the same journal that doesn't get picked up by a national periodical?
In my experience, I think that's a very important thing to happen for a scholar, and that's the kind of thing your chair and or dean, or hopefully your external reviewers would point out in their letters describing your achievements.
Yeah, we try.
That's where the opportunity is to make that clear to the other people who are reviewing materials.
Yeah, we track those things and take note of those things.
Absolutely.
Right, but you gotta have the publication first before the New York Times picks it up. So, yeah, so start in that direction, so.
Yeah, like the Virginia Tech guy that found the water in Flint. I mean, how important is that, right? Anyway. Other questions? Thank you all very much. It's great to see you all.
Thank you both. That was very informative.
Thank you, Gloria.